My name is Jonah Jonathan. Tonight, I've had the unique opportunity of getting to interview a really great jazz legend. I say legend because he's a really great historian, archivist, producer, teacher, educator, and really just a genius in the field. And the person I'm speaking about is Schaap, and I've had the great opportunity of studying with him for the last 2 semesters at his swing university at Jazz at Lincoln Center, and he's granted me an interview. And the first part of this interview is going to be talking about the issue of economics and jazz musicians, and the second part will be talking about education and the educational system and possible reforms. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have the great opportunity of speaking with jazz legend, if you will call it, Schaap.
All right, well, Jonah, the story here is a fresh one for you, but it's deep into chapter 9 for myself. And we're going through a period of great decline in jazz economically. And I would evaluate the contemporary period as one of 3 major catastrophes economically in jazz history, ranking this one in a tie with the Great Depression itself in the early 1930s, and worried that the way things declined in the 1960s are undoubtedly going to happen. But they're going to happen for a different reason now. The reason why the economic scene for musicians, jazz musicians, I could go for all musicians, but for jazz musicians in particular, is because our entire educational apparatus has been geared towards replenishing a bandstand that's overstocked, while there's been no attention to replenishing the audience. And the audience that was alive when jazz was its most popular are largely deceased. They're deceased, and so they can't come to your gigs. And the schools are, restocking the Stan Kenton Orchestra and the Benny Goodman Orchestra over and over again every year. And of course, neither orchestra exists. And the demise, through the simple supply and demand economics, the demise of the marketplace, because supply is great and demand is shrinking, and that it's so out of whack, means that there's really no possible turnaround, in my estimation, in the near term.
Could you speak to us a little bit about what happened back in the old days? There was so many musicians who appealed to the public. Could you speak as to why jazz is not appealing to the public anymore?
Well, I guess the broad answer to the past having better things going for it in terms of work, and the present not, relates, of course, to when the music was first played, there was no possibility of canned music. Live entertainment was the only entertainment. Home entertainment centers meant that you entertained yourself. And in fact, this is not just a jazz thing, it's a comprehensive thing. The musicians were really a middle class to upper class or upper middle class craft guild. Because they had a nice job, they dressed nice, their working conditions were suitable to the time in comparison to other similar paying jobs. And if you were going to have a dance, you couldn't have 2 turntables and a microphone. You had to have a band. There was no way to do it with pre-recorded music. And the whole demise of live entertainment, which is rooted, I guess, in broadcasting. Certainly the advent of television changed things. And that work was once plentiful, even in dire economic times, like in the Great Depression. So this is an economic calamity that is so much dwarfing the one we're currently living through. A recession is what they call it now. Depression is what was then, and unemployment was at 28.6. Now that's a Great Depression. The record companies were disappearing without, of course, the same particulars of why they're in such trouble today. But still there was work, because there was still this factor of you needed live musicians for music to be performed. So that's why the Great Depression really wasn't the worst economic period in jazz history. And why would the 1960s therefore be? Well, this really is the nadir economically, and it's not because live entertainment was completely crushed. That hadn't happened yet. It's just that jazz had worked its way down the ladder of popularity, and that their audience, which was still extant, had largely bailed on the way you might have partaken of jazz. It's one of the reasons why the record business in dire times tends to keep itself afloat a little bit longer, because, well, you know, I'll buy a record and I'll listen to it to my own, in my own schedule and stuff. But the ballrooms had closed. The now middle-aged swing era people were not going out. They were now suburban. So the urban to suburban shift, the home life of the 1950s, and I guess the surfacing of other popular tracks for music. It's really, I guess, more complex than I realized. That why the 60s is the nadir is documentable. I mean, Duke Ellington couldn't get a record contract. Birdland closed. Ornette Coleman, Dexter Gordon, Arthur Taylor, Johnny Griffin, they're leaving the country. Columbia Records is dropping Thelonious Monk and even Dave Brubeck. And had Miles not come up with his fusion formula, I believe he would have been cut as well. So that Roy Eldridge didn't make a record as a leader between 1960 and 1970, that Riverside Records went bankrupt, that Prestige Records sold, that Blue Note Records went to the first large corporation, early Liberty, then to United Artists, and eventually on to Capitol and EMI. Even though it's considered an active label, you can see its catalog. So I can give you the particulars. It's difficult to give a full explanation of why jazz, as opposed to, say, society music or folk music. There was a whole hootenanny craze. Certainly rock and roll was the core of the pop music scene. So jazz tanked to a specific in the 60s, probably why the period is so unique. And
sure.
Whatever put the music on its heels in the 60s, to some extent, continues now. There's no audience, and there is this newer factor of too many musicians for far few gigs.
Sure, yeah.
And of course, the names of the past are past. I mean, there's a couple. Sonny Rollins, I'm sure, can sell out the house. And Ornette Coleman is, of course,
sure.
revered internationally.
Ron Carter or some of those.
There's some. Roy Haynes is having a very nice, thank heavens his abilities are so great in his 80s. But we're in this third period, which I call a tie for second, and now we are blending into the general scene that, live entertainment is in great decline, and when you have live music at a social function, it's pre-recorded music, sometimes manipulated by the person running the gear, the machinery, the turntable, whatever. But so there's a live performer conceivably, but there are few live musicians, usually none, and this can't possibly work. And as I was starting to say, there can't be a quick turnaround to this problem, because the nurturing of an audience will require a generation of training.
Sure.
Education is the only avenue I can see having a huge and positive effect to this, and that's going to take time. And then there's the, not so much cultural, but the aesthetic teaching that needs to be given to the future about the joys of live entertainment. And this is a very complex issue, because most of the times when you do go to a live gig, no matter how small the room is, there's a sound system, and the sound system, when it's doing its best, is approximating what a good record would sound like of the gig.
Sure.
But, the sound of live music is a unique thing. I'm used to bands playing. I'm not that old that I remember when it was completely acoustic, except in the classics. But usually there was a mic near the piano and a mic in front. and that was it. And occasionally the bass player had an amplifier, or he was closer to the microphone that was gaining the piano, and it filled the room. You could hear it. And trust me, the reason why you know you could hear it is because before that there was nothing and you could hear it. Chick Webb's band played acoustically at first in the Savoy Ballroom with 3,000 people dancing, and everybody heard it.
Sure. Okay, well, now I'd like to move on. You were speaking to us, we're here in Phil Schaap's, the end of Phil Schaap's Jazz 301 exam, and you were speaking to us about the decline of the educational system with regards to music. And I'd like you to speak a little bit about that and what's happened and what could possibly be done to bring that back.
Well, didn't I approach it? Say that again to me. Like, I'm trying to figure out if there's something other than education that I can raise.
As far as with bringing back the popularity to the music, because you said it will take at least another generation to teach people to appreciate live music again. What can be done as early as possible in the schools to teach people, and bring back what originally happened, as you say, in the New York systems starting in kindergarten?
First, I'll state that I don't think jazz will ever be able to enter the rungs of absolute pop music status. And furthermore, I think the way music was popular from the 1860s through into the 1980s is unlikely to occur again. So there's going to be a new ball of wax in terms of viability in the marketplace. And conceivably, although it's only a hope, the niche musics will regain presence because they can claim a portion of an audience now that nobody or few, very few, could claim
you
a
said
large
that
amount of audience.
When you were making money in the 60s playing as a musician, you were making more money back then than musicians are making now.
It was easy because, now I didn't say that these were jazz gigs, because although jazz musicians sometimes were on them, none of them were jazz gigs. The holiday party at a business is still something that goes on. I would say that there are more of them now than there were in the 1960s. However, I would go so far to say that almost none of them use live music.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that in 1964 and 65, 70% of them used live music. And they were staggered through the day, as they still are. Some would have it around lunchtime, some would have it after work, some would have it in the late afternoon up to the end of work, and some would make a big splash in the evening. You might actually work all four of those parties. And jazz gigs, the whole structure of live entertainment was different, as well as the frequency and variety of it.
Yeah.
Some of you are basketball fans. Knick games started at 8:45. You're supposed to go out for dinner. Then you went to the event. Broadway shows started at 8:45. Then you went to the club to hear some music.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the people who don't do it now would say, how the hell did you stay up to 1 o'clock in the morning? And of course, there was a difficulty for some. But there were people who went to these events and lived that life, and they're gone. The people who live the life now want their entertainment, if it's a nightclub, connected to dinner, over by the real end of dinner time, and they're home at 9:30. The Broadway shows can start at 7, be over at 8:50, and you could theoretically be home easily at 9:30, depending where you live. So the number of hours, I was talking about the number of gigs the same, the number of hours, that the club could stay open for 5 sets, because there would be people there at the first and last set and the sets in between. When people here at Jazz and Lincoln Center asked me to explain how it economically worked when I first started out, the answer is more time.
What can be done as early as possible in the schools to teach people, and bring back what originally happened, as you say, in the New York systems starting in kindergarten?
first I'll state that I don't think jazz will ever be able to enter the rungs of absolute pop music status. And furthermore, I think the way music was popular from the 1860s through into the 1980s is unlikely to occur again. So there's going to be a new ball of wax in terms of viability in the marketplace. And conceivably, although it's only a hope, the niche musics will regain presence because they can claim a portion of an audience now that nobody or few, very few, could claim a large amount of audience. Because nobody knows what the #1 song is, or certainly not what the number 33 song is. And you would have known that in the 1930s via the hit parade and through a completely different process during the rock and roll era. So there's going to be a change in music's placings, the different music systems and styles and their placement in the pop world. Now, as far as jazz jockeying position for that, music appreciation needs to be restored to the public school system. It was there and very big in the years from the 1870s till the Great Depression. And although this generation is largely died out because they would be in their 90s, if you meet people who were given public school education in the United States, particularly in New York City, I'm from New York City, you'll discover that they know an incredible amount of music. And this would be people who are virtually tone deaf. They'll sing imprecise pitches, but they'll do things like, this is the symphony that Schubert wrote but never finished. And how did they know that? I mean, I don't have any students who know Schubert's unfinished symphony. I guess I do at Juilliard. But I mean, they had all kinds of, I've got a gig with the Red Priest. There's the Four Seasons of Vivaldi. That's a jazz one. That's not actually the one they taught in elementary school. But music appreciation is the function of music education that's completely absent and is the one that's necessary. I believe, and I believe that the younger elements of musicianship training, which of course has been decimated, is also a significant practice. I think the system that we have in place can't work, where we don't pay too much attention to elementary school, middle school, junior high school education. Most high schools don't have music programs anymore.
And we pay attention to college.
And then college, so you learn it on your own till you're 16 or 17, and then you go to the college program to take your music lessons for 4 years to go out and be unemployable.
And not only that, when you go to college, you're essentially learning what you're supposed to learn in maybe 10, 20 years on the bandstand, trying to learn in 4 years, which doesn't necessarily work out. I mean,
gigging application is also a huge process, and certainly some of the commodities of music presentation that I teach, and I think my students like hearing, and this is now Juilliard graduate, are stage concepts in simple music things like dynamics. I mean, dynamics have disappeared in my lifetime.
Sure.
From absolute control to out of control. So there is something to be said about improving the music as part of the changing of the situation for the better. But the way it works now, most musicians are playing some flavor of hard bop, and what they're doing, and they're proud of it, and they should be, they're improvising while swinging, while displaying through improvisation a profound understanding of very complex harmony. And it's a brilliant thing. And they know they're doing it, and I believe they know when they've done it satisfactorily. And when they're satisfied and they're fair about their rating themselves, it's an incredible thing that they pulled off.
Sure.
But their audience, which is applauding for them, they're saying, wow, did you hear how he did that? Man, that's even cooler than the juggler at the circus. I mean, it's so amazing. Like, he just did all that stuff. And you have a disconnect. The disconnect from what the musician thinks he's doing to what the audience thinks they're doing. Wynton Marsalis has always asked me to explain the swing era and jazz's success. Well, this connection is really that storyline. The musicians thought, this is a nice tune. our band plays it well. The arranger has done quite a bit of excellent development
Yeah.
and has created a little slice for me to paraphrase the feelings of the melody through my musical thoughts.
Sure.
And the audience says, this is a beautiful melody, this is a good band, I love this tune, I like what they did with the tune, and then when that trumpet player had that little spot there, it wasn't the tune, but it really added a lot to it, and I really enjoyed it. That's when there was this close connection. Connection to what the audience perception of what's going on stage and what the musicians think they're doing on stage. When they're closer, you have the match that allows for success.